And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here, and welcome. Welcome to Final Throws, late stage capitalism. Here we are, 21st century style, the end of an era, if you will. Enormous corporate greed. Marry that with incompetent and, compromised governments. You throw in a little bit of, neglected rural communities, and what do we got? Well, look, I look at the corporate greed that we're seeing. What, in 2022, Norfolk Southern pocketed $4.8 billion in profit and used a lot of it for stock buybacks. We've got a cash compromised government. You got officials who said, yeah, nothing over the week and a half before, well, they figured out that, hey, we could use this to get the other side. Let's not forget the unions that have been crushed and handicapped by 40 years of supply-side voodoo Reaganomic economic policy and theory that said, go on, corporate America, go get those workers. And, of course, let's not forget the neglected small towns who are helpless to stand up to either. Welcome to where we are, America. And, I looked at this, and there's some things on the social medias that ask good questions. When Republicans figured out they could attack Pete Buttigieg, this is when this got attention. Stop and think about how it sparked. We were talking about this last week. This week, it sparked some attention. Oh, my goodness. Pete Buttigieg didn't say anything. Well, neither did the congressman in that district either. And you would think the guy who's, I don't know, those are his people. Those are the people that he's supposed to represent, Republican Bill Johnson. You would think he'd have put out a statement, something nice and mealy-mouthed and soft about, I care about my people. Didn't even do that until he was scheduled to go on the F channel to talk about how Biden and Buttigieg are doing nothing. And look, I got my problems with Biden and Buttigieg on this issue, because there's a lot of blame to go around. But I find it interesting that it only came to light, it only came to the front of the media structure when Republicans go, hey, this is a way to go beat up on those Democrats. And then people start going, well, what about the working people? Now, here's the thing. This is the weird part of this. This should be nonpartisan, completely nonpartisan. The person we should know his name is not Buttigieg or Biden or any of the idiots on the right who have made this an issue to attack Biden and Buttigieg. We should know the name of Alan Shaw. You go, well, who's Alan Shaw? Thank you, mainstream media, for not pointing out that he's the CEO of Norfolk Southern. Huge salary, lives in an 8,000 square foot mansion. Was supposed to show up and address the good people of East Palestine, address their concerns, keep them up to date what's going on. And do you think he showed up? No, didn't show up. We surprised? No, not surprised at all. And the thing is why don't we know the names of these CEOs who do these things? I had to look him up. I didn't know who he was. Why aren't these the people who are being blamed? Why aren't these the people who are going to jail? The statement that's going around all over the place is, hazardous material specialist Sil Cagliano, I guess his name is. He said, we basically nuked a town with chemicals so we could open up the railroad. And that's the reality on a certain level. We allowed them to, one, continue to push and destroy safety regulations, be unsupervised, because, again, we have this bizarre belief that Alan and the board of directors at Norfolk Southern care about those people in East Palestine. If his 8,000 square foot mansion was in East Palestine, I'll guarantee you there'd be some stuff going on. But it's not, because this isn't somebody else's backyard. This isn't poor and working class people's backyards. This isn't in the well-to-do areas where our CEO class in their gated communities. You don't see the train going through their backyard. No. And this, again, is another one of those moments that you look at this whole system, this whole stinking system of massive corporate greed, government officials that are at the behest of these corporate titans. unions that have been hobbled and handicapped and beaten over the decades, and small towns who are incapable of standing up to any of them or doing anything. The fact that Norfolk Southern offered the town of East Palestine 25 grand, 25 grand, as you know, oh, here's something to help you get through this little minor tragedy, this tiny little spill, which equates to about $5 a resident, $5, and did this with a straight face. And again, I keep going back to, remember, Republicans thought this was an opportunity to lay all the responsibility at Biden and Buttigieg's feet without anyone asking the question and going, wait a second, isn't this your ideology? Aren't you and your conservative ideologues responsible for this? Isn't this pro-business run amok? Isn't this globalization and corporatization and deregulation run amok? Isn't that this? Answer, yes. Because we're now getting early reports on what the cause was. And I said from the beginning, there were reports that the train was on fire. It turns out it was reportedly on fire for like 20 miles before, it finally derailed. Turns out, according to the NTSB, their report today that came out said NTSB investigators have identified and examined the rail car that initiated the derailment. Surveillance video from a residence showed what appears to be a wheel bearing in the final stages of overheat failure moments before the derailment. The wheel set has, they got it. They know which one it is. They're sending it off to be tested in their labs. The valve that failed, they've got that because they blew up the train. They're going to send that off to be tested. And you know where this is all going to go. And I said from the beginning, eventually they're not going to blame Alan Shaw. They're not going to blame the board of directors. They're not going to blame the railroad industry for their precision scheduled railroading that has gutted tens of thousands of workers, has said screw safety, we don't care. None of that. They're going to lay it at the feet of the workers who were supposed to do those inspections in 90 seconds and look at 120 different things. That's where this is going to go. And you go, when do we wake up? Now, understand, according to the Government Accountability Office, in order for the railroads to save money, what'd they do? They made trains longer. So you have these bigger, longer trains and add fewer people doing these jobs, so you've got fewer people per car checking this stuff. They point out between 2008 and 2019, train lengths have increased by 25%. So that train that was going out of the station, in 2008 is now a quarter bigger. And you go, well, that's just saving money for the company. Yeah, but they're doing it with far fewer employees. They also point out, according to a report over at USA Today, that regulators have found that hazardous material violations are way up. In fact, 36% more hazmat violations. Because again, as we heard, a couple of days ago from our friend over at the Smart Union, they've gotten rid of the people who were trained and qualified to do these inspections. So you've got, supervisors, you've got people pencil whipping things through. And again, this is predictable. This is what the union workers were screaming about over the summer for the last couple of years, to be honest. And what the Biden administration dropped the ball on. We wanted to get them the best income. We wanted to get them this, but weren't listening to all the problems. The sick days were a huge problem, but the safety was also a huge problem. And the fact that we didn't listen, the fact that we didn't push for it, and even I said, there's no way Congress, there's no way the president, there's no way they're going to let these guys go on strike. There's just no way. So they've got to get in there and impose things on the rail industry, because the rail industry is not going to ever voluntarily do anything that's going to cost them more money. Inspections cost them money. More personnel costs them money. And they've sat down, they've done the bean counting. They've gone, okay, so let's say we have a little derailment. Yeah, let's say we have, 11 hazardous material cars full of nasty, toxic stuff, spill into the water there in East Palestine, Ohio, and head down the river through the state of Ohio to the Mississippi. So let's say that happens. What's it cost us? And they actually figure out they're going to pay the little town $25, $5 a head, 25 grand. Maybe they pay another one, couple of bucks, because they know they can steamroll these little towns. They know they can steamroll elected officials with their massive lobbying arm. So they've made the calculus. So we have one of these. We'll chalk it up to human error. We'll blame one of those workers, and we'll get away with it. And no one's going to come after us. And it's not just, look, it's just not the rail industry. It's every one of these massive industries that get away with consolidating to the point to where they're even more powerful than the federal government, where they can hold this government hostage. Look, the railroads could hold this country hostage. And they knew that. It wasn't that they couldn't afford sick days. It wasn't that they couldn't afford better safety procedures. It wasn't because they couldn't afford to replace bearings on these. It wasn't that at all. It's because they didn't want to. It's not because they couldn't afford it. Get out of here. They didn't want to. What they wanted is they wanted to live in their 8,000 square foot mansions. They wanted to line their pockets with huge stock buybacks. And again, this comes back down to policy. And this again goes to the heart of the people who are screaming the loudest, my Republican friends and conservative Democrats, who let these companies get away with this. Been talking about this for years, which again is the reason that you need to have strong unions. And you go, well, these workers have a union. Yeah, but only to such a point. Because federal law, if you look at what the Railway Labor Act does, basically neuters their ability to take any direct militant action. This is why, again, we need to have a strong, vibrant labor movement to stand up and fight these things. Seriously, think about this with me. And I've used the analogy of, if you're the only person on the road with a radar gun, are you going to speed? The answer is yeah. These corporations, they don't care about the communities. They don't care about their workers. Yeah, we see flowery language, we see commercials, and yeah, in some rare circumstance where the owner is still on site occasionally, maybe, but these giant multinational corporations, these giant multi-billion-dollar companies, they don't care. All that's just a negative on a balance sheet. It all comes down to how much they can put in the shareholders' pockets, how much they can put into their pockets. So am I surprised that hazmat violations are up? No. Am I surprised that trains are getting bigger? No. Am I surprised that the inspection times are less? No, of course not. Because this is what allowing industry to police itself gets you. When you don't have a strong counterbalance to corporate power. And look, our elected officials, they understand it. They know where the power lies. And it's not with you and me. It's with these big industries and their lobbying arms. And until we start taking that back and make this a nonpartisan issue, and we yell at all sides to ensure that this never happens to anyone, it's going to continue to happen. Not just in rail, but in every industry. Look at the thing that happened with Southwest not too long ago, where they had thousands of people grounded because of their screw up. That everything to do with their mismanagement, their corporate greed. Do we hold them accountable? No. So there's a lot to be angry about. And working people, let's figure out how we get angry about the right stuff. Being angry about this is the right stuff. The poison that we're being pushed by our friends on the right, not so much. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is 25 grand for a town enough? $5 a person? Would you take the $5? And they're coming around. They're asking people to, hey, can we come in your house and be free of any liability to make sure your air and your conditions are okay? Would you sign it? Boy, I sure hope not. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments. and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
See, this is why I don't find it of any surprise whatsoever that, according to the Associated Press, half of the Americans that they surveyed in a recent poll indicate that they believe national news organizations intentionally mislead, misinform, or persuade the public to adopt a particular point of view through their reporting. This is the Foxification of our news media. This is the cable news stuff, because it's not news. I get people all the time going, well, you know, you think you're a journalist. No, I'm not a journalist. You think you're a news program. No, not a news program. If you're coming here thinking that I'm reporting you the news, you're wrong. This is an opinion program. This is a talk program. I want to hear other people's opinions. I want to hear thoughts. But this isn't news. News, I go to news organizations, real ones, not the F channel, not CNN. I go to real ones. I look at the New York Times, the Washington Post. I even look at the right-wing stuff, the Washington Examiner. I look at news outlets and filter through what they're saying. So am I surprised that half of the country who gets their news from the F channel thinks that their news is biased? No, not a bit. Especially when you look at the reporting on this derailment. Because a handful of Republicans thought, hey, this is a way to go attack Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, it's now become, it's a right-wing thing. And the focus is going to be, attacking, Buttigieg and Biden. I had people early on saying, Biden, he ordered an executive order to make this happen so we would forget about the balloons. And look, I'm sure on some quote-unquote news station, news channel, someone said that as if it were really true. I could just picture it. I can't. Someone in a nice shirt and tie with one of those really great green screen backgrounds that looks really official with the beautiful chyrons and the flashing images and everything, going, breaking news. Inside Edition tells us, or whatever, Joe Biden signs executive order to derail train. Poisons thousands to cover up his vaccines. You can just see this happening. So it's not surprising to me. And since most people get their news from Facebook, which how that happened, it's not surprising that most of it's BS. I mean, what used to be The Onion is now what was once satirical. People are now starting to take serious. I've had people send me satirical articles going, see? I'm going, do you not see at the top of the page it says satire? And the answer is no, sadly. Because we're so biased in our thoughts that, the right wants to hate Joe Biden so badly and the left wants to hate Donald Trump so badly that it doesn't matter the source anymore. So am I shocked? No, not at all. Because the real news is bad enough. Corporate America is screwing us at every opportunity. That's the reality. Who unleashed them? I go back to and maybe it's just that I'm a little bit older and I remember talking to older people a lot. But we had an economy that was heavily regulated. We had an economy that ensured that workers were safer, had better opportunities to earn better wages. I was reading a book today that we're going to have a guest on in a little bit was reading her book, and she points out that the trucking industry, and I already knew this, but she actually put a number to it. In 1980, when deregulation was signed, a truck driver was making about 110 grand a year in today's dollars. That's down to $47,000 in today's dollars. Over the decade from when deregulation happened, wages for truck drivers dropped by 44%. And again, it's these bad neoliberal policies by both parties. Look, conservative Democrats and the Republican establishment that ram this stuff down our throats. So am I surprised that people are angry and grasping for something that they want to be true? Like Republicans care about working people? I know they're making a heavy pivot. They really are. They're making a heavy pivot, and this is one of those issues saying, oh, no, we care. Yet I haven't heard the F channel talk about the people on the train. Because there are only, what, 2 or 3? I haven't heard anyone say, how come there weren't people on that train to make sure that when that fire started, that they saw it maybe 10 miles into when it started. So that maybe they could have begun this process of slowing down, made the derailment less bad. Who knows? Who knows what could have happened had you had, I don't know, someone there. The fact is we don't have someone there anymore. We've got technology, and at least they tell us. These detection systems that aren't regulated, aren't really even mandated, but the railroads put up the camera or the image just in case. And you wonder why where we are is where we are. And I look at this, am I surprised that half the country doesn't believe what they're being told? No, I'm actually surprised that number's not higher, especially when you look at Twitter. You got Elon Musk, who bought Twitter specifically to destroy what it was, and fired his engineer when his impressions weren't high enough. I mean, really, there's nothing funnier than a egotistical billionaire who feels jilted. I mean, I blocked him on Twitter just because that's not what people are doing. Because I think at some point there has to be some blowback. He's angry that Joe Biden's tweets got more impressions than his did. This is why having gazillionaires owning any monopolistic entity, having that kind of power is bad. My grandparents' generation understood that. And as I was saying, that generation business was heavily regulated to ensure safe conditions, to ensure good wages, to ensure that people were held accountable. And we're in a moment right now where, corporate America knows they can cause catastrophe. They can do horrible things. And we're just going to eat it. Because the cleanup here, there's going to be a big bill that'll be paid. There'll be some money that'll go out. They'll make a huge thing out of it and say, look how much we paid for this. But the long-term costs, we the people are going to end up eating. The externalities of all of the illnesses that are going to happen because of this, all of the suffering that's going to happen because of this, all of the lost wages, all of the broken families, that's not going to be borne by Norfolk Southern. They don't care. They live in their 8,000 square foot mansions. They don't care about you and your 1,500 square foot bungalow. This is where we are. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day the uprising of the 20,000 officially ended in New York City. As many as 30,000 young, predominantly immigrant Jewish women went back to work after a bitter 11-week strike. They faced down their bosses, the police, and the courts. Arrests and fines drained much of the union's funds. Young union leaders like Clara Lemlich had been arrested 17 times and suffered 6 broken ribs. Women garment workers spent most of the winter running to union meetings, handing out leaflets, walking picket lines, raising funds, and distributing strike benefits. Many smaller shops settled in workers' favor early on in the strike. But by mid-February, closed shop demands kept many workers on the picket lines. The strike ended with partial but real victories. Garment workers won the 52-hour work week, 4 paid holidays, employer-paid tools and materials, collectively bargained wages, and more. The International Lady Garment Workers Union started the strike with 100 members and had 20,000 by the end. All but 14 of the city's 353 shops signed contracts. But many garment workers continued to face unsafe working conditions like locked doors and flimsy or non-functioning fire escapes. Safety-related demands would not be addressed until after the 60,000-strong cloakmakers strike the following summer. One of the largest factories and worst offenders was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Workers there went back with no agreement. 147 would die a year later in a tragic fire. In the aftermath, basic fire safety principles were finally established and implemented in New York State workplaces. These formed the foundations for many modern-day fire safety practices, like exit signs and doors, better ventilation, and sprinkler systems, fire alarms, and drills.
Please be my Valentine. That is not only a warm, sweet, sometimes romantic sentiment people express in mid-February on frilly red cards. It's also the name of a 3rd century saint who literally lost his head, a 9th century pope whose reign lasted only 40 days, 3 Roman emperors, a very good Mexican hot sauce, and a tiny town in Texas. That town has a genuinely sweet story to tell and a unique role to play in the sending of thousands of Valentine's Day sentiments to people around the world. Valentine, Texas, population 217, was founded by the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s and reportedly was named for one of the corporation's big shareholders. Nothing romantic about that. But in recent years, would-be Cupids have turned the town's name and, believe it or not, its one-room post office into a center of affectionate expression. What happened is that romantics from distant places began to batch up their pre-addressed stamped valentines and zip them to this postal outpost way out on the Texas-Mexico border. Why? Because to give their sentimental missives extra oomph, they wanted them to bear the special touch of being mailed from an actual place named Valentine. The greatest thing about our public postal workers is that they literally deliver, and the Valentine branch goes the extra mile to provide this loving gesture at no extra charge. Ismelda Ornelas, postmaster of the 79854 office, hand stamps each envelope herself. Indeed, the Valentine Post Office is now officially designated the Love Station. Moreover, the local school district holds an annual art contest among students to design each year's Valentine postmark, which is then stamped on each envelope. This is Jim Hightower saying, see, while the media tells us our world is going to hell, here's another grassroots example of loving, creative people going the other way. Happy Valentine's Day.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, tweeted out, I think it was yesterday, that she wants to ban TikTok, I guess it is, which I'm not against. She wants to ban Confucius Institutes, ban CCP-owned farmland in America, bring manufacturing back to the USA, and hold Xi Jinping accountable. And I'm like, I think I wrote that tweet before Twitter existed. I kind of think that this not a bad idea. Maybe we could get some people to come on board. But I got to tell you, I find it amazing that this balloon thing has taken on such insanity. And now, as I said from the beginning, and I do not back up, this was a trial balloon. I don't think they were gathering anything important. It was a trial balloon to see how we would react, and we failed. And here to share some thoughts on the big balloon and, well, what Marsha and the Republicans now who've seen the light. They've seen the light. What are they going to do? That's why I've asked Emily De La Brea to come talk with us. She's the co-founder of Horizon Advisory, horizonadvisory.org, their website. Emily, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get your thoughts first on this whole balloon thing. I said from the beginning, I'm sure we knew when they were building the damn thing that it was coming this way, and they followed it all the way here, which you're now seeing reports that happened. But it was my initial impression that they're doing this as to see just to throw chum into the water and see us eat each other, and we failed this test. I'm curious your thoughts.
I absolutely agree that the balloon is more significant for the response and what that response indicates about today's attitudes towards China, US China relations, and fundamental contradictions between the two countries than it is about like what precisely this balloon itself was doing and its security implications. I would add two things to your framing. The first is that the balloon was also just testing, I think, the US resolve to respond. How much Washington and how much the American people were willing to escalate to see this as an actual threat to engage in something closer to conflict. So a trial balloon for sentiment and willingness to act, as well as for anything else. And just the other thing is that I think that this whole balloon incident underscores quite how real the threat of China has become for the American population and the American individual in a way that was not the case. Like, that was not as acute, as tangible, and that didn't lead to the same kind of like real desire for action 2 years ago.
No, I mean, now we're gonna have a Senate investigation. John Tester is gonna lead up the spy balloons, the balloon gate. Let's call it balloon gate. We're gonna lead into this, and we're gonna have hearings, and there's gonna be all this stuff. And you go, I remember when we were in the Cold War, during the USSR years, this kind of stuff happened all the time, and the country didn't freak out, and it wasn't used as a thing to pit people against each other. This should be, and I said the first time it came out, this should be something that unites us around the idea of taking on China. This should be the thing that brings us together and go, yeah, we don't want them over our heads, but we also don't want them buying the ground under our feet either.
100% on all of those fronts. And there's this weird disconnect where, on the one hand, incidents like this are great for like waking up the American population and hammering home how much we don't want China not only like over our heads spying, but also showing blatant disrespect for American sovereignty and security. But the answer is not all to obsess about balloons and all to run after the ball and decide that, yeah, all of the commissions, all the investigations, all the resources have to be allocated towards a Chinese balloon project. Like, the answer is to address China's threat broadly.
Exactly, but here's the thing. I see people complaining about the balloons. They look up. I got to see the balloons. But I don't see people deleting their TikTok accounts if they even can off their phones. And if you read the terms of service and people, I've asked people to try and take it off. They can't get it off. There's no way. They collect every keystroke. They collect all your images. They're collecting so much information and data on us. They don't need the damn balloons. They got the TikTok.
Yeah, like China is a huge threat. China's surveillance and efforts to control the American population are a huge threat. And those are so much more pervasive in our society than any individual balloon story. And I'm torn because this balloon case is amazing for, again, the narrative impact, the rallying call it's provided. And that's partly because it's so absurd as a word, as an idea. It's partly because you could look up and see the balloon if you were in Montana at the right time. The issue is that there has to be that sinew that connects amazing story, dominated the news cycle for 10 days, Balloon Gate, to, okay, here's a real strategic comprehensive action by China that includes the things that, as you said, actually really matter deep down, like TikTok.
See, because here's the thing. It only became a story. And this is the thing with the derailment as well. It only became a story when Republicans thought they could hurt Biden and the administration. That's it. And again, I see a lot of words. I don't see any action. And so there are a lot of tweets. There are a lot of people on the F channel, slamming their fist on the table, wagging their finger, doing all that. But I'm not seeing legislation. Where is fine, let's ban TikTok. Let's do that. Fine, let's go and reclaim some of the corporations and the land and the things. If you're going to go this route, where's the policy? Where's the actions?
I'm going to take what you said and put two slightly more positive twists on it because, as you pointed out, for once I'm not wearing black today. Um, First, I think that there's another reason this became a big story. And I think that's that the American population was involved. That individuals looked up, saw the balloon, filmed it, started telling this story. And that to me suggests that there's another power here, like that we're not talking about, and that's that the American people can make something a big deal when they feel that's important for the country and for national security. Um, and I'll always be optimistic about that as a potential reality.
No, I
Um,
hope so. I hope you're right. But again, I guess I grew up in an era where this stuff happened fairly often, and there was faith that we're dealing with it. We know they're there. The fact that there are people, running around saying, Biden didn't know it was going anywhere until I saw it with my. I said from the beginning, we probably knew as they were making it what they were going to do with it. And we see the reports now that they saw it launch, they were following from launch all the way across and actually gathering data off of it. We can't even have that conversation without people with their hair on fire.
the other thing, going back to your initial point, which does not resolve the current issue of where the action is, but I think gives some hope in the future, is that the other clear lesson from the Republican pressure on the Biden administration with respect to the balloon is that every political incentive in Washington right now is to take a harder line stance on China.
And that's
The
a good
problem
thing.
is, as you said, like there's a risk that that's just a narrative thing and no one's actually checking politicians' rhetoric against their realities. But if that checking can happen and if politicians can actually be held accountable, which goes back to the power of the American population, can be held accountable for converting narrative to action, that's where there's real potential because clearly this is where every driving force is going.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Emily De La Brea. She's a co-founder of Horizon Advisory, horizonadvisory.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. So to that point, enough talking about the balloon at this moment. Strategically, if we do move on policy, what can we do to hold China more accountable? What are you advocating we should be doing? Because look, you talk to the average person on the street. We want manufacturing done in this country, and I think Biden is doing as best he can to reshore some of that. We want to make rebuild our infrastructure and have it made in America. We want to do those things. How do we, without starting a hot war? How do we navigate this new I gotta assume is the next Cold War? How do we navigate this that doesn't put us in a destructive position for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, there are more tactical things, but things that really matter, both on the defense and on the more proactive offense, or investing in a competitive America. You mentioned TikTok and China's pervasive use of quote ostensibly commercial entities to increase its leverage, increase its collection of data, and try to shape our behaviors. We should be taking real action on those companies. As we invest in domestic manufacturing, we should be doing so in a way that actually protects against Chinese leverage over our manufacturing. So let's not build electric vehicle battery plants that depend on Chinese technology or that are joint ventures with Chinese entities and support those with government money. Let's, if we're going to partner with trusted economies and also try to build domestic champions. Throughout, if we've identified critical value chains that matter, let's invest all the way up the value chain. So we're not just developing American technology that requires critical materials from China, but actually developing whole trusted supply chains.
Can we do that? I mean, I've been told that the 4 years of the previous administration and our basically leaving the international stage, China filled that void and basically gobbled up most of the natural resources we need in the battery production arena, and that we're kind of dependent on them in a certain way. Or is that not correct?
So China has actively for decades been investing in international sources and domestic processing for what they see as the critical inputs into batteries and other emerging industries. That doesn't mean that there's not a chance to compete with them, including through domestic resources. In many cases, these aren't necessarily scarce materials. They're just materials that we haven't invested in mining or processing of and that require productive capability. Also, partnering with allies and partners who do have reserves. Canada is a great example. of a country that has enormous natural resources. And we should be working with Canada in terms of developing more secure supply chains as well as with other partners. And generally, like we are putting an extraordinary amount of money into strategic supply chains. All of that effort should start at the beginning of the supply chains because if not, I mean, actually, as Chinese sources say, we're building on an adversarial foundation. There's also just across the board like bigger picture strategic actions I think we should be taking. So, for example, I would argue that we should be calling into question permanent normal trade China's permanent normal trade relations status. They've aggressively defied every commitment that was made when we gave them PNTR. Why are we not talking about revoking that status now? And that's the kind of like big picture system level action that could impose real costs on China.
So let me ask you this, because I've advocated this for years. This is not new in my arena. We should have never given them this. It should have been temporary if we did, with sunsets and goals and all kinds of things that just never happened. Are we not so tied into them that at this point you would cause catastrophe? Inflation would go through the roof, and this would become a political football that Chinese money that is so pervasive in our country and our economy would just well, whoever tried to touched it would be destroyed.
I mean, there I think there are two sides to that question. The first is like the process of how this happens, right? There have to be clear signals sent to the private sector probably first, but it's not an overnight situation. So that there can be investments made. It's not absolutely devastating. And just because of inertia in the process, that probably would happen. For example, we might switch to a yearly debate in Congress as to whether to give China PNTR status for that year or whatever the phrase is. And then ultimately that would make it more possible or incentivize the private sector to find alternatives. But the other part is generally, like, no matter what, competing with China the way we have to compete from China and disentangling ourselves from China the way we have to, it's gonna hurt, right? That's gonna come at a cost. Inflation will go up. We will feel it. But that's a short-term cost versus long-term losing out entirely on American prosperity, security, and the international system.
And this is where you and I will absolutely agree. I think where we differ is that, I think this balloon, again, back to the damn balloon, was a trial balloon to see how we would react, to see how we would, across party lines, eat each other. And I think we failed that test. I think if you saw that kind of inflation from reshoring more faster, I think you would see the same kind of dynamics. Or do you disagree? Do you think there is a way that we could make a campaign? Is there a way the parties would come together and say, no, this is what we're doing, and we feel your pain kind of moment? Do you have those kind of high aspirations and hopes?
I mean, I really want that to be possible because I don't see an alternative. And I also there is a part of me that remains convinced, and again, it's an optimistic part, but remains convinced that as it becomes fully internalized that we do have an outside authoritarian adversarial force that's threatening our country, how can the two parties in America not work together on that front? How can that not bring us together? And maybe I'm totally out to lunch and this is rose-colored glasses, but because that is such a necessity for any progress moving forward, I'm going to continue to maintain that it's possible.
So in looking at what Biden's doing thus far, and look, I think it's I've been saying that the thing that I like about the policies that they're moving on, and they're not doing it fast enough, and there are things that I don't like, but the fact that we're moving away from 40, 50 years of neoliberalism and starting to talk about reshoring manufacturing and starting talking about an economy that works for working people in the ways that my grandparents' generation built, to me, there's hope in that. But sadly, again, these are all attack points from folks who it's just trolling to say, hey, Biden's doing horrible stuff. When the reality is, I think long term, we're going to look back and see this as a transformational period.
And you can even just look at the narrative of the past few years and see how transformational it has been. I mean, what you just said, those are now talking points for both parties. Were those anywhere in the drinking water 5 years ago?
Nope.
And I'll add that, on what again might be my foolish optimism, I do think there's hope in looking at the track record of the select few legislators in Congress who work in a bipartisan way. And that track record is most obvious and most successful when it comes to legislation and positioning relevant to China and to American industrial capacity. And it's a select few, it's not a lot, but that is a real sign, I think, of potential and potential for working across the aisle towards like the most important economic and security action we can be taking.
Last question I've got for you. Obviously, the balloon has gotten us to make aggressive moves. In fact, we've shot down a couple more balloons. I'm waiting for what else we're going to shoot down. Do you see them? Do you see China ramping this up, or do you think they got what they wanted?
That's a great question. And there's so much uncertainty because there's still so much uncertainty in this program. I think China was taken aback when we shot down the balloon. And I think that was not something Beijing was counting on, and that really did put them on the defensive in a way that had not been factored into any calculus. Now, as we devolve into reflexive infighting and resorting to tools that don't work, I think Beijing, is probably getting back into its more comfortable trend. But again, we're 10 days in, and this is still the big story, and the American population is still pushing for something. And one of the interesting things about China is you can tell when there's uncertainty about what precisely that question, whether they're ramping up or ramping down, because they don't really solidify around a narrative. And that's the case. So that's a long way of saying I think China's figuring that out right now.
Yeah, nobody knows. Yeah, we'll see if they shoot one of our balloons down. Not allowed to say that. But we'll see. But Emily, I appreciate the time. As always, good stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Remember, check out Emily's website, horizonadvisory.org. We'll get links out on social media. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. That was the day the Red Scare took its toll on the U.S. labor movement. The Congress of Industrial Organizations expelled the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers for their alleged communist ties. Although small in numbers, communist organizers had played an important role in building the large industrial unions that were the core of the CIO. During the CIO's 1949 convention, this anti-communist hysteria was on full display. There, the CIO delegates decided to bar any individual with communist affiliations from serving as union officers. Their panic did not stop there, as the CIO leadership also voted to revoke the charters of unions they deemed too closely aligned with the communists. Immediately, the convention threw out the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers. During the 1950s, more unions were caught up in the purge, including the International Union of Longshoremen and Warehousemen. In all, the anti-communist frenzy saw 11 unions ousted from the House of Labor. According to a report to Congress by the Department of Labor, the cause of these expulsions was that the union's, quote, espousal of Soviet Russia became increasingly distasteful to the CIO leadership and rank-and-file membership. Cold War fear-mongering had effectively isolated the most left-leaning unions in the country. The impact on the labor movement was long-lasting. After the purge, unions took a much more moderate stance on things like civil rights. This hampered their organizing efforts in the South. To this day, there is less union representation in southern states. It also pushed the CIO closer to the Democratic Party and paved the way for the CIO's reunification with the more politically moderate American Federation of Labor.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So as I said, I'm I'm optimistic about what the Biden administration is doing and moving us in a direction that's going to reshore some manufacturing and take this on. This should be something that brings us together. Everybody I talk to, everybody says we've got to claw back what we've given off to China. We've got to rebuild our manufacturing facilities. In fact, when we took the tour over October and into November before the election, and we went into places that have lost massive amounts of jobs and manufacturing capacity, they all said the same thing. We want someone who's going to fight for us. We want somebody who's going to fight for industry and keep jobs here, instead of allowing corporate America to seek out the cheapest, most exploitable labor wherever they can find it, China. We want those jobs here. Now, Emily's right. The transition's going to be painful. It was all sunshines and rainbows when these corporations were leaving and holding workers, hostage and screwing them over. But this is one of those moments where I'm optimistic of what the administration's doing, but I still fear we've got the quote-unquote opposition party who all they want to do is be opposition. There's no plan. There's no thoughts. There's no way of, hey, how are we going to actually do this? That's my problem. Let's quick get a phone call in. Alice on one. How are we doing, Alice?
We're doing okay. I survived the containment camp, but I wanted to tell you that I was talking to one of the local Trump supporters, and their daughter-in-law and son live like 10 minutes away on the Pennsylvania side of where the train wreck was in Ohio. And they were saying that some of the fumes and stuff were drifting over there. And she was just going on and on about she didn't know why Biden and who, what not, didn't do something about it. And I was so proud of myself. I bit my tongue. And I just said, I don't know what's going on. Because, trying to reason with them and saying, actually, let's trace this back, wasn't going to do any good. But
tracing this back doesn't.
Some of them are sitting up and noticing it.
No, but here's the thing: tracing this back doesn't just stop with Trump. This goes back, decades and decades of deregulation and of this ideology of the companies will police themselves and do the right thing. This is decades in the making, and these kind of catastrophes happen. Maybe not in this kind of spectacular fashion, but this kind of stuff happens every day, and workers and communities get screwed over and end up holding the bag in this. And for me, I want this to be the learning lesson out of this catastrophe, that this doesn't have to happen all the time.
Oh, I know. I agree with you. That it's been going on for a good 45 years when they started cutting the regulations. But I just thought to myself, there's no use saying, well, let's go back a few decades and check out some of the
that's a narrative you didn't want to get into. I got you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Alice. No, and she's not wrong. Look, this is a long explanation. There's no bumper sticker here. There's no, blame Biden. Biden did that. There's none of that here. This is a long explanation. This is business friendly run amok. This is, corporations taking advantage of a political system that's starved for cash. Because we've decided that corporations are people and they have the right to pollute, evidently. So am I surprised? No. And look, I don't blame Alice for not having a conversation around this, because it's hard to explain. It's hard to go all through, decades and decades of this stuff. The fact that there were 40 railroad companies back in the 80s, we're down to 6. It's incredible. The fact that they had tens of thousands of more employees performing safety checks and doing the work, whereas now we've got more trains than ever and fewer employees. That's hard to explain. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
We basically nuked the town with chemicals so we could get a railroad open.
Ohio residents sue over fiery chemical train derailment after governor's decision to release toxic chemicals. Exxon drops its algae biofuel charade. Plus,
are you excited about buying an electric vehicle but worried that it could leave you unsatisfied?
Electric vehicles dominate Super Bowl car ads, signaling a potential culture shift.
Emphasis on potential. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Netflix is joining in by including more EVs in their movies and shows. It's the least they can do.
It's the very least they can do. We'll take what we can get. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, what's going on in Ohio is not getting nearly enough coverage from the national news. Essentially, they have poisoned thousands of people, it seems to me.
Yes, it does. Cleanup is underway in East Palestine, Ohio, after last week's massive toxic chemical train derailment and fire, and officials' decision to burn off the train's flammable cargo in a controlled release operation to avert the risk of an even larger explosion.
Controlled release of toxic chemicals.
Residents have been allowed to return to their homes, but at least 4 class action lawsuits have been filed, seeking damages, and to force the railroad company, Norfolk Southern, to provide free health care monitoring amid reports of dead farm animals, birds, and fish in downstream areas and concerns about long-term exposure. The fiery derailment has renewed calls to upgrade railroad safety in the wake of staffing cuts implemented by the railroad industry and the Trump administration's rollback of Obama-era regulations tightening safety standards for trains carrying highly explosive liquids. On Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency identified 3 additional highly toxic chemicals released by the derailment and confirmed that some of the chemicals have been detected in the air and surface waters of the Ohio River Basin, but below thresholds that would trigger public health concerns.
The people who live there seem to be very concerned, and yet Governor Mike DeWine told everyone to just go on back. Everything was fine. Everything was safe. It seems that it was anything but.
In other news, last week, oil giant Shell posted all-time record profits of $42 billion in 2022.
Hey.
This week, environmental law firm Client Earth filed a climate lawsuit with England's highest court against all 11 individual members of Shell's board of directors.
Aww.
The first-of-its-kind suit accuses the individuals of failing to manage the company's climate risks and, quote, breaching company law by failing to implement an energy transition strategy that aligns with the landmark 2015 Paris Agreement.
Company law? Do companies have laws?
Apparently they do.
Well, and I guess they're willing to violate those as well.
Oil giant Exxon also reported record-shattering profits.
Yay!
$59 billion in 2022 alone. And then Exxon quietly announced it is ending its much-touted research into developing sustainable algae-based biofuels.
Aww.
Exxon has spent millions since 2009 boasting about its algae research in ads and investor presentations, which critics throughout have condemned as greenwashing. Accurately, it turns out. Environmental activist Bill McKibben asks, why didn't Exxon invest those millions in solar and wind energy? Because, he quipped, energy from the sun and wind are free forever, and that doesn't fit Exxon's business model.
Sounds about right. By the way, didn't we have a story just last week with BP doing the same thing, record profits, and then backing off of their climate targets?
Yes. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres cited the oil industry's record profits last year in calling for governments to end billions in fossil fuel subsidies doled out every year to the fossil fuel industry.
Despite all of their war profiteering?
Yes.
Go figure.
In his State of the World address, Guterres warned that on our current trajectory, we are headed toward a catastrophic 2.8 degrees Celsius temperature rise above pre-industrial levels. Guterres castigated the powerful oil industry for blocking the shift to clean energy.
If you cannot set a credible course for net zero, you should not be in business.
Yeah, they shouldn't be in business.
Finally, commercials during the 57th Super Bowl game appear to mark a cultural shift. There were only 4 automobile ads in total, and 3 of them were for electric cars, including one that made fun of range anxiety or the fear of running out of a battery charge. But streaming service Netflix went a different route with an ad from comedian Will Ferrell announcing an initiative to increase the visibility of electric vehicles by featuring EVs in film and television. And it appears to be working. Online retailer Cars.com reports it saw a 21% increase.
KCAA Loma Linda.